Okay, so good morning to everyone. Yeah, so let's start today's lecture. So, is there another lecture going on? I mean, why are there so few people? Does anyone know?
Well, actually, there is a quiz just after an hour the class ends. So that's why like people are maybe studying
Oh,
for like
okay,
even
I see.
like, even when the class were offline, like people usually don't come before the quiz.
Okay, okay, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Vinny. Okay, so Ayman Hardy, you have raised your hand. So, do you have a question or? Okay, I think. Okay, so let's begin today's lecture. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so in the last lecture we introduced this notion of derivation, right? Uh, so derivation is basically a way to think about how this context tree grammars generate strings, right? Or uh, how to find out the strings, right, that are present in the language of a context tree grammar. So the simple idea in a derivation is that you basically apply the production rules, right? So given a string, right, which has some non-terminals inside it, you consider a production rule where one of the non-terminals, right, present in the string is on the left-hand side, right, or on the head of the production rule, and then you replace that non-terminal with the entire body of the production rule. Right? And so this is a single step of the derivation, and you keep on doing this derivation until there are no more non-terminals. Right? So if you begin this process from the start symbol S, then whatever terminal string that you get, W, that would be in the language of the context tree grammar. And the set of all strings that can be generated beginning from the start symbol S is the entire language of the context tree grammar. And we said that, so we defined a context tree language as a language for which there exists a context tree grammar. So, so given a language which is a set of strings, right, if there exists a context tree grammar such that this language is the same as the language of this context tree grammar, then such a language is called a context tree language. Okay. Uh, and then we also saw how to reason about uh, how to reason about the properties, right, of a language that is generated by a context tree grammar. So just like we did in the case of regular languages, right? Like we did in the case of a DFA. Right? We said that, okay, if you're given a DFA and if you want to show that the language that's accepted by this DFA obeys certain properties. Right? So we can do the same kind of reasoning for context free grammars as well. Right? So here, for example, we showed that if you are given this grammar, right, G, right, as shown in the slide, then the language of this grammar uh, it basically is the set of strings of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n. Right? And the way to do this proof is to again show that the two sets are equal, which means that for any string that is generated by the grammar rules, right? So that's any string that can be derived beginning from the start symbol S must be of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n. And conversely, if you take a string of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, then you can come up with a derivation, right, from the start symbol S. And so the first direction is done using induction on the number of derivation steps. So you say that, okay, after any number of derivation steps, I will be, the string that I get will be of this form, right? But we have to strengthen the inductive hypothesis, right? Because that would be uh, the symbol S, the non-terminal S itself, right? So what we say, right? The inductive hypothesis says something about the sentential form, right? Which is the set of all strings that you can derive from beginning from the start symbol S. And in the other direction, we say that, okay, if you are given any word of this form, 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, then I use induction on the length of this word, right, in order to show that I can generate a derivation, right, or I can, I will be able to give a step of a set of the sequence of derivation steps which will lead to that string. Okay. Uh, yeah. So are there any questions regarding yesterday's lecture? Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So one of the obviously, I mean, the proofs about CFGs are important because writing proofs, right, helps you informally sort of reasoning, right, about the properties of the languages that are accepted or that are defined by context-free grammars. But the other reason why the proofs are sort of important, right, is because they also give you some idea of how to design a context-free grammar. So if you're given some language and you want to design the context-free grammar of this language, right? So look at how we proved this direction, right? Where we said that, okay, if you are given a word of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, then I can write down this word, right? Or I can break down this string into a smaller substring, right? Which is this 0 to the power n minus 1, 1 to the power n minus 1, right? And then I can inductively assume, right, that that this string is produced beginning from the start symbol s, right? And that's why I can use this production rule 0 as 1, right, to come up to basically derive the string 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, right? So that's the general strategy that we would use if we are trying to design a context-free grammar for a given language, right? So in this lecture, right, at least in the first part of this lecture today, we are going to uh, we are going to do some exercises, right, about how to generate or how to come up with a context-free grammar for a given language, right? And this is the strategy that we'll follow. So, so let's look at how to design a CFG for a given language. So just like designing a finite state automaton, right? This is a creative process. So there can be multiple context-free grammars for the same language. Uh, However, this is slightly harder than designing a finite state automaton because a finite state automaton is like a program. It's a machine, so it's easier to write just such programs. But a context-free grammar has this recursive formulation, right, uh, where you have to sort of break the string down into smaller strings, right, and then recursively see how you can generate them. So, but that's the general strategy to follow, right? So if you're given a language, right, which means that so if you want to generate a CFG for a language whose strings must obey some property, right, then you basically break down the strings into smaller strings with the same property or some different property, right? Uh, and then you can use other non-terminals, right, in order to represent those substrings, right? And then you can see how do you generate those substrings, right? So you basically break down a problem, right, into smaller sub problems. Okay, uh, so if you are given a string, right, then you break down into substrings, and then you try to see how to generate those substrings, right? And you can obviously, so here you can use recursion, right? So you can use the other non-terminals when you're trying to write or when you're trying to design the CFG for those substrings. Okay, so let's illustrate this using some examples. Okay. So let's consider this particular language. So so this language is of the form contains strings of the form AI BJCK, where the property is that I must be equal to j plus k. So what are some example strings in this language? So for example, a square bc is a string in this language. Then a cube b square c is a string in this language, and so on. So so what would be a context-free grammar uh, for this language? So any suggestions? So I'll give you all a couple of minutes, right? And if you know the solution, then please raise your hand. So this grammar would be very similar to the grammar that we've already seen for this 0 and 1n. Right? So here you have to do something similar. Okay, I have one raised hand. Okay, so okay, I have two. Okay, so Pasumarthi Lakshmi, can you please write down your solution in the chat window? Okay, so I will also write this down. So S generates epsilon. And then S generates ABS or ASC. So this is the whole solution, I think. Okay, so is this correct? See, this is not correct, right? Because so since this is ABS, right? Yeah. No. So the strings in this Lagrange have this form, right? That we have A's followed by B's followed by C's, right? So you can't have A again. So this particular language is going to have, so the language generated by this CFG, right, can have, for example, AB, AC, which is not a string in this language. So this is not correct. So I have another raised hand, which is Vinith. So maybe Vinith, you can write down your solution. Okay, so I have S generates epsilon, and then S generates F, and then F generates AFB. Okay, and then F generates AFC. Okay, yeah, this is also not correct because why is this not correct? I think because C and B, the order of C and B is not maintained, right? So B's should come before C, but in this case, C can come before B as well. So I think this is maintaining this property, right? That the number of A is equal to the number of B plus the number of C, but the order between B and C is not being maintained. But this is very close to the actual solution. Yeah. Uh, so okay. So let's write down the solution, right? So it's very close to this grammar, right? That we need. So we say that let's say S could generate, for example, this. Right. So let's look at this grammar. Let's say that S can generate this capital ASB or epsilon, where A can generate A, and then B can generate B or C. So, so in this particular grammar, right, you can generate as many copies of this capital A and capital B as you like, and uh, so is this correct? No, right. So this is also not correct, right? Because we are still not able to maintain this ordering, right, between B and C. So all the B's should come before all the C's. Yes, that's right. Okay, so how to do this? Any suggestions? Let me erase this first one. See, you need to maintain this number of A's and number of B and C's, right? So there should be a production of the form A. Okay, so Madhula Jaikamal is saying we can define B to the power J T C to the power K first, and then combine it with A to the power I. And I have a suggestion from Samuel. So let's write this down. So P generates or A, B, C or epsilon, and then R generates A, R, and B or epsilon. Okay. Okay. So in this case, uh, you would first generate as many copies of A and C as you want, uh, but they will be equal, and then once you generate all copies of A and C, you will then generate copies of A and B. So the number of A's will be equal to the number of B's plus the number of C's. Yeah, and you have maintained the ordering between B and C as well. So yes, so this is correct. Yeah. Okay, good. So we were able to figure this out. So let me just erase these two. Okay. Okay. So let's do another example. So suppose I want to create I want to design the CFG for this language. So this is 0 to the power I, 1 to the power j, where I is less than or equal to 2j. So this should be straightforward, right? So again, I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to think about this. And if you know the solution, please raise your hand. Okay, so let's start with you. Okay, so this generates epsilon or S1 uh, or 0 S1. Okay, so for every copy of 0, you're adding either two copies of 1 or you're not adding any copy of 1 at all. And you're maintaining the ordering as well. Yes, so I think this seems right. Okay, Madhula is saying 0 as 1 1 and 0 as 1 also. 0 as 1 1 is already there, but 0 as 1. Yeah, I think we need that as well, right? Because since I is less than or equal to 2j, right? So well, I don't think we need 0 as 1, right? Yeah. Yeah, 0 as 1 is not needed. Let's see that. So I can't, yeah, I can't sort of figure out a string which won't, which is there in the language but won't be generated by this grammar. 0, 0 as 1. Now see, I is less than or equal to 2j, right? So, right. So yeah, you're right, right? So since I is less than or equal to 2j, this means that you have more number of zeros, right? So you can possibly have more number of zeros than one, but there must be at most twice the number of zeros as one. Yeah. So yeah. So let me do that. Grace. Okay. So this is wrong. So the correct answer is s epsilon to yeah 0 as 0 0 as 1. Yes. Uh, but there's a problem here as well, right? So since I is less than or equal to 2j, right? But then you can have more number of zeros as well. Yeah, so this is also wrong. Okay, I have another suggestion. So this is S generates epsilon or S1 or 0 0 S1. Okay, so you are either adding twice the number of copies of 0 as 1 or you are adding more copies of 1. So that the number of copies of 0 are, yeah, at most twice the copies. Okay, 0 0 0 1 1. Yes. Yeah, but if you add 0 as 1, right? So if you add 0 as 1, uh, so either you are, okay, so either you are adding twice the number of zeros as 1, or you are adding the same number of zeros as 1, or you're not adding any zeros as 1. Okay, yeah. So in total, right, you're sort of ensuring that the number of zeros are at most twice the number of ones. Yeah, I think this seems right to me. Okay. So I also had another grammar in mind, right? So let me just write that down as well. And let's see if that is right or not. So let's say that consider this grammar, right? So um, so is this correct? So here, since this a can go to either 0 or epsilon, right? So you're at most adding twice the number of zeros as one. Yeah, yeah, I think this also seems correct, right? So, right. Okay. So let's do one more right example. So this is slightly more complicated. So let's try to design the CFG for this particular language. So this is the strings over 0, 1 stars is that, so this notation n0, right, we saw in the test, right? So this is the number of zeros in W and this is the number of ones in W. So it's saying that the number of zeros in W are equal to the number of ones in W. But apart from that, there are no restrictions, right? So zeros and ones can come in any place, but the number should be the same. So again, take a couple of minutes to think about this. Okay, so I have a solution, modular J command. So let's try that first, right? And then maybe you can also look at main solution. So this is the solution. So S generates epsilon and S generates 1 S0 or 0 S1. Is this correct? So what about something like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1? I think this you'll be able to generate. But what about 0, 1, 0, 1? Okay, yeah, so SS needs to be added. Okay, so let's add SS. Okay. Is this correct? So once again, so why did we need to add SS? What string? Okay, so we have string 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0. Let's write that down. 0, 0. So I think this you can generate, right? Because you can break this down into two substrings. Yeah. And then you can generate them together. So what is the logical explanation, right, behind this grammar? Right? So uh, why is it that you can generate? It's easy to see that any string that this grammar generates is actually going to have the same number of zeros and ones. Right? So the question is that how is it that if you take any arbitrary string which contains the same number of zeros and ones, uh, how is it that we can come up with a derivation sequence uh, using these production rules? Okay. Yes, Vineet. Number of zeros. Yeah. So number of zeros added is equal to number of ones added. That's an explanation for saying that any string that is derived, right? that is present in the language of this grammar contains equal number of zeros and ones, right? But the question is that if you take any arbitrary string with equal number of zeros and ones, how is it that it's guaranteed? Okay, so first we're saying either the string can be partitioned into two halves with equal ones and zeros, uh, or there is a difference of one in both halves. Okay.
So,
Yes, Vineet.
so the final string where like in which the number of zeros and number of ones are equal, the
Mm-hmm.
we will compare the starting letter and the end character of that string. If they are 0 or 1 or 0, then we can reduce the problem to generate the middle string, and then we can anyways add 0 1 or 1 0.
So, okay, so you're saying that you're looking at the start and the end position. Okay. And if they have 0 1 or 1 0, then it's fine. But what if it is the same?
Yeah, and if they are 0 0 or
Oh,
1 0, then we can
yes.
divide this into two halves. Like there will be two sets of equal zeros and equal ones.
So if the start and the end symbol are the same, let's say 0 0, then you divide it into two halves, and then you know that both of these strings must have equal number of zeros and ones.
Yes, sir.
Uh, because okay, I see. Okay, so Madullah Ajay Kamal is saying that this string, so let me write that down. Okay, 0 1 1 1 1 and 0 0 0 can be divided. So we are saying that if you have equal, so if it starts and ends with 0, right, then you can divide it somehow such that the resulting strings will have, you can divide it not equally, right, but there is some division of this string uh, such that the resulting two substrings have the same number of zeros and ones. Yeah, okay. So in this case, yeah, Vineet is saying that you can divide it like this. Uh, okay, so why is it that you can always divide the string uh, if it begins and ends with the same? So it's more like, so if you begin with 0, right? Uh, and if you sort of move, if you consider the prefix of the string, right, then since we know that the suffix of the string, there exists a suffix which has one more 0, yeah, we can always go till the position such that the first part, okay. Uh, mm, okay. So, okay, Malka Reddy is Reddy is saying assume that it starts with 0, then
Hello.
yes.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that like assume that the it starts with zero, so we can keep on going to the right until we get equal number of zeros and ones. There will always be such a stage that we'll get equal number of zeros and ones because the final string has equal number of zeros and ones and the first and last character are the same.
But it will be a substring, right?
Yes, it will be a prefix. Like the first
Yeah.
half will satisfy, and so if the first half satisfies, the second half also must satisfy because the string has all equal zeros and ones.
Okay, I see. Okay, so the argument is that if it begins with 0, right, and it ends with 0 as well, then since we know that this string contains equal number of zeros and ones, we basically traverse the string, right, and we get a prefix until the number of zeros is equal to the number of ones, and this will always happen uh, because because we know that the entire string, right, contains equal number of zeros and ones, and this will necessarily be a prefix because it can't include the last zero. Right?
Sir,
Is that, yeah?
we can think of it this way also. Assume it starts with 0.
Okay.
Then number of zeros minus number of ones is 1.
Okay.
And for the prefix n minus 1, the prefix number of zeros minus number of ones will be minus 1. Because number of ones are more. Because last is also 0, we are assuming last
Yes.
also to be 0. So
Okay.
from 1 to minus 1, in between there must be a 0, because every time it changes by 1 or plus 1 or minus 1, the sum.
Okay, I see.
Number of zeros
Okay,
minus
so
number of ones initially is 1, and finally it becomes
yes.
minus 1. So it must pass through 0. Because in
Okay.
each step we change by 1.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, I think that's a good argument. Right? So we start with 0, the number of zeros. We keep track of this number of zeros minus the number of ones. Initially it is 1, and before we reach the last 0, it must become minus 1.
N minus 1
Yeah.
position, not last position.
Yeah. So just before we reach the last position, it should become minus 1 because there is one more 0 at the end. So since it starts with 1 and becomes minus 1, and at every point we always increment. We can either add by 1 or we can subtract by 1, right, to this number of zeros minus number of ones term, right? Okay, yeah, I think that's also a good reason. Okay, yeah. So okay, good. So this is correct, and we have also established a reason behind why this is corrected. So I mean, this is also another way, right, for reasoning about. So in the sense that if you reason about correctness, right, so if you can sort of see that how you can break down any arbitrary string with this property uh, into substrings, right, then it also helps you in designing the CFG for this language. Okay. Okay, good. So let's this is the last exercise for designing the CFG. So let's move to the next topic now. Okay. So there was a question in the last lecture, right, that regarding how many. So if you take a string, right, we know that there can be multiple. If you take a string in the language of the context-free grammar, then there can be multiple derivations of that string. But we sort of imposed a bit more constraints, right? While we are coming up with these derivations by considering this concept of leftmost derivation and rightmost derivation, right? Where at every step of the derivation, we basically pick the leftmost non-terminal or the rightmost non-terminal, right? But there is still this question, right? That even if could there be multiple leftmost derivations, and could there be multiple rightmost derivations of the same string? And in order to answer that question, we introduced this concept of a parse tree, and which we'll use in defining this notion of ambiguity in grammars. Okay. So let's look at what are parse trees. So parse trees are trees, right, which are labeled by the symbols of a particular context-free grammar. So if you have a context-free grammar, okay, if you take a string that is derived or that is present in the language of this context-free grammar, then this process of deriving this string, right, beginning from the start symbol S, can be represented in the form of a parse tree. Okay. And these parse trees are going to be just trees, right? But the nodes of these trees are going to be labeled by the symbols of the grammar. Okay. So either non-terminals or terminals. So in particular, the leaves of this tree will be labeled by terminal, which is a symbol of the alphabet, or epsilon. And the interior nodes will be labeled by non-terminal. It's the constraint that if you have an interior node which is labeled by a non-terminal, then the children of that node, right? So they will be labeled by the body of the production rule for the parent. So if you have an interior node, so this interior node is labeled by non-terminal. So I look at a production rule which has this non-terminal, this particular non-terminal as the head of the rule, and then the children of this particular node, they will be labeled by the body of this production rule. And the root must be labeled by the start symbol. So so before looking at examples, let's see why parse trees are sort of important, right? So besides having theoretical applications, right, parse trees, so as I said, right, so the parse trees clearly show how the substrings of the string uh, in the language are derived from the different non-terminals. So it's basically a very precise representation of the process of derivation. But there are practical applications as well, right? So they are heavily used in compilers in order to express the structure of the input program. Right? So as I told earlier, that the syntax of a programming language is generally expressed in the form of a context tree grammar, and then a program, right, then would become a string, right, in that context tree grammar. So which means that there exists a derivation for that program, and this derivation for the program is expressed in the form of this parse tree. And this parse tree is then internally used by the compiler in order to perform some actions. Right? So during the compilation process, right, the parse tree will be used by the compiler in order to obtain in order to perform in order to do the compilation process. Right? So in order to basically translate this source program into the final executable. And as I said, so this parse tree is also going to help us in formalizing the notion of unique derivations and ambiguous grammars. So let's look at this example of a parse tree. So this is the grammar for balanced parentheses, right? And here is a parse tree, right? So this is the parse tree for the derivation of this string. So we saw the derivation of the string in the last lecture, right? In fact, we looked at both. So I think we looked at the leftmost derivation of the string. As you can see, right? So in this parse tree, the leaves of the parse tree are basically labeled by the symbols by the terminals, right? By the symbols of the alphabet, while the interior nodes are labeled by non-terminals. And if you take any interior node, right? So for example, if you take this node, right, then its children are going to be labeled by the body of a production rule, right? So here we are using the production rule S generates SS, and that's why S children are labeled by SS. Similarly, here I'm using the production rule S generates this open bracket S close bracket, and that's why its children are labeled by this open bracket S and close bracket, and so on. Right? So in this way, right, a parse tree clearly depicts the derivations, right, or the production rules that are used in deriving this tree. So now that we have a parse tree, we can now reason about the string that is generated by parse tree. Right? So this is also called a yield of parse tree. So the concatenation of the labels of the leaves in left to right order is the string that is derived by the parse tree. It's also called the yield of the parse tree. And so which means that we are basically performing a pre-order traversal of this parse tree, and we are only looking at the leaves, and we simply concatenate, right, these labels of the leaves in the order in which we visit them during a pre-order traversal. So as I said, the yield of this particular parse tree is this string. Okay. And so once we have this concept of parse trees, we can now formally define what is an ambiguous grammar. So a context tree grammar is ambiguous if there is a string of the language that is yield of two or more parse trees. So if you take a string in the language, right, if there are multiple parse trees, right, multiple different parse trees which have the same yield as the string, then this entire context tree grammar is ambiguous. Right? So this ambiguity is a property of the grammar, right? And a grammar will be ambiguous as long as there is some string that is there in the language of the grammar that has multiple parse trees. So in this example, right, there is a string which has multiple parse trees. So can anyone suggest what that string would be? So remember that why would we have multiple parse trees, right? So it's because the the structure, right, in which the way in which we are basically deriving a string is different, right? So for example, right, so let's consider this string. Okay. Uh, so now there are two ways in which I can derive this string. Let's try to come up with the parse tree for this string. So so I have to apply the rule SS, right? But now, right, I have two choices. Right? So I can either apply the rule SS again on the left child, or or I can apply this rule on the right child, and then I'll get opening bracket, closing bracket, and sorry, and the same here. So yeah, so in this case, right, I get two different parse trees, and the yield of both of these parse trees is this string itself. So that's why this particular grammar is ambiguous. So when there are multiple parse trees of the same string, if there exists such a string, then the grammar would be ambiguous. Yeah. So this particular, so we have already seen the two parse trees for this particular string. So also note that so here we're talking about parse trees, right? But there are but how do you relate this with this notion of derivations, right? So there could be multiple derivations with the same parse trees, right? So there are two different things here. Right? So the way that we say that a string is in the language, right, is that we find out a derivation of that string. Now there could be multiple derivations which have the same parse trees, okay? Uh, but uh, but but that just means that these derivations would basically perform the same productions, right? We would use the same production rules, but in a different order. So for example, if you take this particular string, right, which we also saw in the last lecture, right, then I can basically come up with two derivations for the string. Right? So I apply the rule SS first, right? and then uh, and then I take the first S, right? Uh, so here I'm performing a leftmost derivation, right, where I always look at the leftmost non-terminal and apply a production rule there. Sorry. So let me just erase this. So this is a leftmost derivation, but I can also have a rightmost derivation, right? Where I basically expand upon the rightmost non-terminal. So in this case, I would basically have this particular derivation. But so these are two different derivations. But if you draw the parse tree, right, for this particular string, so the parse tree would have this form, right, where I'm first applying SS, right, then applying this rule, and then this one, and same goes for here. Yes. So both of these derivations, right, have the same parse tree. Okay. So in this case, right, so for this string, right, there is in fact a unique parse tree, and so that means that we cannot use this string, right, as a sort of witness for the ambiguity of the grammar. So you must be able to differentiate between this notion of multiple derivations and multiple parse trees. Right? So with a parse tree, you can have multiple derivations. However, there can only be a unique leftmost derivation and a unique rightmost derivation. So there is a one-to-one correspondence between a parse tree and a leftmost derivation and a rightmost derivation, which means that if you have a parse tree, then there is a unique leftmost derivation, and similarly there is a unique rightmost derivation. Right? And conversely, if you take the leftmost derivation of a string, then there corresponds a single parse tree corresponding to that particular derivation. So since ambiguous grammars can have multiple parse trees, so this means that they can also have multiple leftmost or multiple rightmost derivations. So this also gives an equivalent or an alternative definition of ambiguity, which is that ambiguous grammars, in an ambiguous grammar, there is a string which has multiple leftmost derivations, right? More than one leftmost derivation or more than one rightmost derivation. Similarly, so this also means that it has more than one parse tree as well. Okay. So we'll end the lecture here today, and thank you for attending. Those few of you who did attend, and we will meet again tomorrow. Thank you.